It's called the Pentadic method. Okay, so the Pentad. But what's happening in the Pentad is, if you've been through 100B and you got the 5 parts of the Pentad, yada, yada, yada. Okay, hold on to your hats, because Burke is actually doing something a little bit more demanding with the Pentad. So let's begin to understand the Pentad by understanding what Burke thinks the Pentad is telling us. So, looking at the Pentad as a method, part 1, here is what Burke thinks the Pentad is revealing to us. So to understand this method, you're going to need to get acquainted with 3 terms, okay? Terms that Burke highlights as the negative, the hierarchy, and guilt, victimage, and purification. Now, I realize I just smuggled 3 terms into the 3rd term, but hold on, because that's all one idea in Burke, as we will see when we begin to unpack it, all right? Each of these terms has an absolutely crucial element to understand. So if you're going to understand how at least Burke's vision of rhetoric and religion interact, you need to understand these terms. Fortunately, you should be able to get them. They're terms that we have actually touched on in 1 or 2 ways over the course of the semester. So let's start, of course, with that first one, the main term. The main term is the negative. Now remember, Burke is trying to understand language, and he thinks the best frame for understanding language is rooted in religion. And he starts with this idea of differentiation. What is it that language does? Okay, the first thing language does, according to Burke, is it excludes. It shuts down. It says no to every other possible meaning. That's its core idea, its core contribution, actually, is that language is constantly excluding possibilities. Language shuts down. It makes a difference. It tells me that one thing is a thing and not something else. Language is built on this. It is the fundamental aspect, so that when a word is spoken, all other ideas are shut out of your mind, and that single idea is brought forward. So I can say to you sailboat, and when I say sailboat, you imagine one thing. You don't imagine an elephant. You do not imagine the planet Saturn or a spaceship going to the moon. You don't imagine any of those things. When I say sailboat, it calls to mind a specific reality, and it excludes, it shuts out, it differentiates that thing from all the other almost infinite possibilities there are. That's the power of the negative. Now, if the negative sounds familiar to you, if that's ringing a bell, it's ringing a bell because Burke is basing this on that old ad that we explored earlier, that old idea that we explored in mysticism called apophatic theology. He's looking at the theology of the negative. Remember, the theology of the negative is where you keep saying no over and over and over again, right? You say, well, that's not the reality I'm talking about. That's not the reality I'm talking about. That's not, and you keep doing that. And if you do it often enough, then even though you've never said what the reality is, the negation sort of pens it in, right? It sort of makes it visible to you even though you never actually define it. All right, that's what Burke means by the negative. The core of language, the very power of language is in no. It's in not. It's in exclusion. It's in differentiation. It's in bringing a single thing to mind rather than something else. It calls to mind the sailboat, not something else. The same thing happens when I say horse, okay? I call horse. There you are. You think of that animal. You do not think of a tardigrade. You do not think of cockroaches. You do not think of a poodle. When the word horse is spoken, it's a word that negates other meanings and brings a single idea to your mind, all right? Now, these ideas that language can work with, they don't even have to be material realities. They can be non-material realities. They can even be fictional realities. If I say to you, flying monkey, well, guess what? There it is. Right there. Okay? That's the power of language. I can bring to your mind this and not anything else in the world, all right? The power of that language, then, is in the ability to exclude, and those exclusions create a certain power for us. They give us the power to create categories, to put things together that share some named qualities, right? So when we look at the examples, we have up here, look, we can put together a category, things that really exist. Okay, well, that would be a sailboat and a horse. Now, sailboat and horse are in the same category, and flying monkey is not in that category, right? So there we are. We've got a category now, but we could also have other categories. We can say, animals. Okay, well, now the flying monkey and the horse, they're in the same category, and the sailboat is excluded. This is what the not gets you. This is what the negative does. The negative is the property that allows us to create categories inside our language. And it is the ability to make categories that creates the possibility of human thought, Burke says. You cannot think humanly without the not, the negative. And the negative is not found in nature. It is not a natural category. It is something humans bring to nature through language. So the fundamental, foundational idea of language, the negative, is what begins to make language act in a sort of kind of transcendental way. Now here's the thing. These categories that we can found and put together, they're not limited to material realities. There are also moral categories. And of course, moral categories are also rooted in the negative. There are certain things you do not do, right? Certain things that are not allowed. So we have these categories of behavior as well. So the negative creates the possibility of human thought. It creates the possibility of categories, and we have moral categories too. That is to say, these categories of behavior that we create, well, we can categorize some of those behaviors as well as not good, not fitting into the category of the good, excluded from good. Okay, that gives us our sense at this point of the first take-home that we want to have from this idea of the negative. The negative is first and foremost an inevitable part of nature. You cannot avoid it. If you speak, speech by nature, words by nature exclude, all right? They say no to all the other possible meanings. They focus us on one meaning. That in itself is good because that creates categories. And categories are what makes human thought possible. All right? And finally, it's also what makes moral judgment possible. Now, with those take-homes, we've started with the negative in our three terms. Here are the others down here. Three major terms that we've got to get our minds around. We've started with the negative, and we've got three take-homes. It's inevitable, it categorizes and makes thought possible, and it gives us the ability to make moral judgments, which is a good thing, right? You don't want a world, nobody wants to live in a world where everything is okay. You want to live in a world where, people cutting your throat in a back alley and taking your money is not a good thing. That's the world you want to live in, right? And that gets us very quickly to the second of the major terms that we need to unpack, and that's hierarchy.